morning and welcome into the show. Thanks for tuning in. It is Friday, the last day of January 2020. I cannot believe that this month is already over, but it is. It is 8 a.m. on the East Coast. This is your 5 a.m. West Coast wake-up call, all time zones in between and around the world. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting. Thanks for the comments, the follows, the feedback, all of it. Love it. Appreciate it. And I'm thankful for it. Hope you're having a good Friday. I don't know what your plans are for the weekend, but hopefully it is a great weekend for you. For me, this will be first weekend of coaching some matches in a couple years. I had not been actively coaching any kind of teams for a couple years with other obligations, but kind of stepped in for the spring season to coach a team, and it's been a fun first couple weeks of training, and we've got our first matches tomorrow, and so that's my weekend. I don't know what your weekend is going to be like, but I hope you have a good one, and we'll all kind of get through the weekend and see each other again on Monday. Coming up after the break, a friend of mine I've known for a long time is joining the show, and he has been in broadcasting for quite a while, and so I'm looking forward to reconnecting with him and kind of being able to kind of go behind the veil of the media. And so we're going to talk about media, and we're going to look at his career in media, etc. And so I'm looking forward to that. That's coming up in just a few minutes after the break. In terms of, kind of where we are in the landscape of soccer and, different things going on. Obviously, today wraps up the transfer window. And there's been some movement, but no real big blockbuster moves as of yet. There's been rumors of Gareth Bale going back to Spurs from Real Madrid, but nothing has materialized so far, and no real big moves on the horizon. The January transfer window in the middle of the European calendar is typically not an area where you see really big moves take place. Those are normally summertime moves. That's not to say that teams have not found value in winter transfers. Liverpool were able to bring in the likes of Luis Suarez in a January transfer window, and that worked out really well for them. So, you can do that. You can find value. You can get some things done. But most of the time, this January transfer window is a window that is primarily, about maybe plugging a gap or working through covering an issue that you may have on the field, but not necessarily. Not necessarily a time where you're going to see a Neymar, for example, or a Messi move in the January transfer window. That's just not likely to happen. Speaking of moves, Major League Soccer has made it a part of their acceptance process into the MLS club with expansion teams and cities to basically get the cities, the public, the taxpayers on the hook for part of their expansion bid. We talked a little bit a few weeks ago about Charlotte and their work to try to get over $100 million of taxpayer money included in their package. in order to win an MLS franchise or an MLS expansion team. And there's some updates that have come out on the situation in Nashville. Of all the expansion cities in the last few years, Nashville has probably been the worst in terms of buzz and anticipation, excitement. I have friends that live in the area and have even mentioned there's just not a lot going on. Haven't heard anything. And you compare that to, say, Atlanta. Atlanta, that was a real big buzz in the South. Atlanta getting an MLS team, and they drummed it up really big. Arthur Blank said this is a really big deal, and they've really kind of treated it as such. And Arthur Blank, to his credit, has really put money into the team in training facilities, etc. And so you've also seen that investment pay them back in the sense that they've drawn really big crowds. One of, if not the highest attendance since they've entered the league. LAFC, another team that came in with a bunch of fanfare. I remember when right after the team was first announced, my son at the time, I think he was 12, 11, something like that, actually went out and trained with their academy for a couple weeks. That wasn't even fully established, but kind of preliminary setup that they had. He actually went out and trained with them for a couple of weeks, and you could tell there was a buzz. There was a lot of talk. Again, talked to friends in the area who were big soccer fans, and they were all talking about how excited they were for LA getting a team. Nashville, on the other hand, that's just not been what's going on. And the mayor of Nashville has come out and released a statement. Mayor John Cooper: since entering office 4 months ago, I worked towards a complete solution for the fairgrounds. This is the area where Nashville SC were looking to build a stadium, and part of that is to get public support on the public fairgrounds. I've worked towards a complete solution for the fairgrounds that is both financially sustainable and results in a successful unified site plan. This past week, I met with racing advocates as well as MLS. I appreciate MLS and its advocacy for professional soccer in Nashville. I also appreciate all parties are working together to improve the plan for the entire fairground, both in design and financing. I will continue to chart a path forward that makes good financial sense for all of Nashville's taxpayers. Now, I don't know, what that means, because politicians and campaign promises, or in the case of, talking about money, I don't know that is an issue. But nevertheless, that is something that the mayor has kind of said to the public. I've been in office for 4 months. We're going to make sure that the money works for us. In response to the mayor's the meeting with the mayor, as well as the mayor's statement, Nashville SC and MLS have released a statement that says, driven by the excitement of fans around Nashville SC's opening game in the city's bid to host the 2026 FIFA World Cup, we couldn't be more excited about soccer's potential in Nashville. Earlier today, we met with Mayor John Cooper at Major League Soccer's office in New York City to discuss the status of Nashville SC's stadium project. The new stadium and ancillary development have very broad support throughout Nashville and has been overwhelmingly approved multiple times by Metro Council. Despite that, Mayor Cooper has not provided approval to begin the demolition to move forward with the stadium project. So for the past 4 months, Nashville SC has worked to make the stadium deal even better and has proposed a number of new solutions to satisfy his concerns. Even with these proposed new solutions, the mayor today refused to commit to move forward with the demolition and the approved stadium plan. During today's meeting, MLS Commissioner Don Garber made it clear to Mayor Cooper that Major League Soccer would not have awarded Nashville an expansion team without the commitment made by the city to build a soccer stadium at the fairgrounds. The mayor's continued refusal to proceed is a deep disappointment to Nashville SC and MLS. Nashville SC has agreed to work with the mayor's office over the next week to advance the discussions and finalize a plan to begin the stadium construction project. We hope for a mutually agreeable solution and expect to have an update regarding the project by February the 6th. It's just funny, the irony of all this, the demands of Don Garber and Major League Soccer for a city, a municipality, the public, the taxpayers. You've got to foot part of this bill to get us, and then the taxpayers are saying, "Hey, look, we're going to do this in a way that makes sense to us financially." And MLS is getting huffy and puffy about it, claiming that it's the mayor's fault. When you come across that way with that kind of mentality, and you make this kind of statement, it tells you a lot about the way Major League Soccer sees the world, their worldview, and we've talked about that on the show. There's this sense of entitlement that oh yeah, we'll show you, and that kind of mentality is just not a good mentality to have, and you're seeing that entitlement come through. They take it as an insult that a city would drag its feet and make sure it's a fair deal for them. So kudos to the mayor. I don't know how this is going to turn out. I don't like public money going to any of these sports entities. They've got plenty that they can figure out on their own, and should be, and the taxpayers should not be paying for it. So I hope he fights a good fight for the city and makes it economically feasible for the taxpayers. So we'll see how it turns out. Who knows? But interesting situation and development in Nashville concerning MLS. I don't know what you're doing this weekend. As I mentioned, I'm going to be doing some coaching, and yesterday was my brother-in-law's birthday, and I gave him a Ductic brand XL coaching notebook, and so for his birthday, and that was something that he could use as a soccer coach to kind of help him run his teams, etc. So I don't know what your plans are, but if you got a minute, take a second, and maybe it's a slow day at work. Get on ducticbrand.com. Use promo code DWSHOW. You'll get 10% off of your order, and you too can get one of these notebooks. They even have waterproof paper notebooks. Check them out at ducticbrand.com for more information, and use promo code DWSHOW, and you'll get 10% off of your order. We'll be right back after this. back to the show. Thanks for tuning in on this Friday. Typically, we are like super soccer specific, soccer centric. We do talk about the world of sports and some other things going on. Although you will probably never tune into this show to hear anything about politics and the swamp in D.C. So don't ever have to worry about that. But today it's a treat. A friend of mine, we go back a long ways. A friend of mine is coming on the show. His name is Mike Grace. He is host of the greatest podcast of all time. He's a broadcaster extraordinaire, decades in the business. Mike, welcome to the show. How are you this morning?
I'm great, Daniel. I am just thrilled to discover DanielWorkman.com and what you do with SoccerWorks. And yeah, if it's okay, we might talk about the other football for a little while this morning.
We will. I know that is kind of your bread and butter and background. So let's rewind a little bit. Let's get all the way back. I want to talk about your career and your career in media, and then also kind of what your prognostications are for media going forward with what you've seen over the last few years in technology and trends, et cetera. But take us back to the beginning. When did you decide like a career in media was something that you wanted and that you were interested in? Where did that passion begin for you?
Well, Daniel, you have to remember too, we're talking about a really different media landscape when I was growing up. I was born in 1961. And so, when I'm 8, 9, 10 years old, you've got the Apollo missions are going big time. So the Walter Cronkites of the world are these huge guys that, that I certainly admired and remember, listening to, watching and growing up to these great big news names and sports names like Kurt Gowdy and maybe Dick Enberg and some other guys. But I was really always drawn to the radio, mostly just because of music. I mean, that's the first thing that really drew me in was a big music fan. And so I used to just hound the local DJs at the radio stations in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and eventually got one of them. I had one who was a couple of years older than me, but still in high school, that was working at one of the local stations. And I talked him into letting me come sit in with him. And then eventually, after just watching and listening and seeing what he was doing, he would let me basically run the board and run the radio station, everything except going on the mic. I would, go spin records and play the commercials and do all these other things. And so while he did his homework over here in another room. But anyways, once he graduated and went on, he recommended me to his boss, and I got my first radio job in the summer of 1977 prior to my junior year in high school, and worked literally 7 days a week for over 2 years just because I loved it. I did. And this will take you back. This was a 50,000 watt FM station in Vicksburg, Mississippi, Daniel, that signed on at 6 a.m. in the morning and signed off at 10 p.m. every night. So I was the lucky guy that got the 6 to 10 shift, and I would go in at 6 o'clock on weeknights, work 4 hours, spin my records. Then I had the early morning shifts on Saturday and Sunday that as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, those were tough. But I would be there from 6 a.m. until noon, Saturday and Sunday, and just fell in love with the genre. And the truth is, Daniel, since that time, I mean, it's been 40 plus years where I've had a handful of months here or there where I wasn't live on the air somewhere, but I've pretty much been able to enjoy a 40-year career doing what I love. And I just fell into the sports thing. I mean, I did every format and every shift, mornings, afternoons, nights, you name it. Did morning radio for almost 25 years. So as I told you prior to going on the air, these early morning hours, I got real used to not waking up to. I used to start my day around 3:30 or 4, would be on the air at 5, which again, folks would ask me, do you get used to that? And my answer was always, no, you get immune to it. Your body just sort of handles it. But anyways, I just fell into sports. I was doing a morning show on a rock station in Mobile, and had a station owner, program director come in on a Friday morning and say, hey, Monday, we're going to become the first all sports FM station in the country. And it was WNSP in Mobile was the first FM signal in the U.S. to put a sports radio format on the air. That was 1995. And I just fell into that. That opened the door for some play-by-play opportunities. And, it really has been fantastic. I got lucky, Daniel, because the media was changing so much. About that same time is when deregulation went through the radio industry, and suddenly the big conglomerates were buying up radio stations all over the place. And much like we saw here in the last week, if you've been keeping up with the media, one of the biggest media companies in the world just laid off about 1,500 people all over the country. There's at least one instance where I saw where Syracuse, New York, which is a huge radio market, they've got 5 radio stations in that market now and 4 live announcers between the 5 radio stations. That's what the radio market it has become. It's not widespread, but it's certainly in certain instances that way. So when all this was going on, I just fell into what was a hot format, and sports has been really good to me. And as I say, I've been really fortunate all along the 40-year route.
So along that journey, you get in just by, finding something that you liked, you were fascinated with, and then you got into the hustle, and just putting in the time, not knowing where this is going to go, but just loving it and doing it for the love of it. And then it just kind of opened up a career of opportunities for you. And as you mentioned, in the 90s, switching into the sports talk format, in terms of going into that sports format, what were some of the kind of the people that you were able to work with and build relationships with, since the mid 90s, over the last, say, 25 years of, personalities and relationships that you were able to form, develop, maybe work with, growing up as a teenager in Vicksburg, Mississippi, maybe never dreaming or thinking like, hey, I'll have an opportunity to work with somebody like this or whatever, spinning records at a pop or rock station, and now all of a sudden you're in talk radio and you're working with these different types of people. So what were some of those people that you connected with, that you built relationships with, that you worked with over the years that you've enjoyed in this switch of format?
Yeah, and Daniel, that's the really cool thing, is that even before the sports radio came along, the opportunities that the music side of radio gave me to literally go to dinner at the Rendezvous in Memphis with ZZ Top after a show at the Mid-South Coliseum, where they literally shut the whole place down except for ZZ Top and a couple of radio guys that got in thanks to the record company guy. Backstage with Jimmy Buffett in Chicago, and just you name it, all that kind of cool stuff. Sat next to Ann Wilson and Nancy Wilson of Heart on a couch at where was that? That was at Mud Island Amphitheater in Memphis. So all those kind of great things. And then you mentioned the sports radio stuff, Daniel, and that was just, I was blessed to be in a good sports town. Mobile, Alabama has a great sports history. And at the time, a guy named Mike Gottfried, who was the #1 ESPN college football analyst at the time, a former coach at Pittsburgh and other places, was a Mobile resident. And Mike and I got to know one another when they started the bowl game there in Mobile, and what is now the Lending Tree Bowl. I just finished back in January my 21st year of producing and broadcasting their national radio broadcast. So Mike Gottfried's been a big friend. Danny Sheridan, who is a world-renowned odds maker, sports odds maker, is also out of Mobile, and he and I have done radio shows over the course of the years. And I got to visit with Archie Manning, sat side by side with him at one of the bowl games luncheons a couple of years ago, and literally Archie, probably my biggest childhood hero, to sit next to him on a bar stool with a couple of microphones and just chit-chat for 45 minutes was really a thrill. But the biggest name, I keep saying this, as soon as I think of the biggest name, another one comes up, Pat Sullivan. The late Pat Sullivan, who just passed away in the last year, Heisman Trophy winner back in 1971, another one of my childhood heroes. I worked basically for Pat at Samford University in Birmingham for over 10 years as his play-by-play voice, and he left as Samford's all-time winningest coach, and I had the pleasure of calling every one of those Samford wins on the radio over a decade or more. But the name I was trying to get to was Ken Stabler. Again, another one of Mobile's most famous, or at least Baldwin County's most famous products, out of Foley, Alabama. Snake was a Super Bowl winning quarterback with the Raiders, was a national championship winning quarterback, or at least an Orange Bowl winning quarterback with the Alabama Crimson Tide. And I got to do 2 different radio shows with Kenny over the course of about 10 years. And as in awe of, as I was of him, because again, his Super Bowl 11 in 1979 was right in the prime of my teenage years. So he was a big hero. But I got to sit next to him, do radio shows for a couple of years. I would travel all over the Southeast with him. We did live shows from Talladega and from the SEC baseball tournament in Hoover, Alabama, and all these other places. I would travel with him and just be his wingman, watch people of all. I mean, it doesn't matter who you were a Ken Stabler fan. And it was so much fun just to call him a friend and to be his wingman for so many years. And some of the best and funnest radio I ever did was with Ken Stabler sitting next to me.
So you and I met while you were living in Mobile, and your lovely wife, Carol Ann, and the kids, and then you left Mobile to take that job that you mentioned for Pat Sullivan at Samford University in Birmingham. Which was, obviously doing play-by-play, but you were also doing other things with the university. What was that transition like in terms of the career, in kind of taking a university job, and what were some of those roles and responsibilities that you handled while you were there on staff at Samford?
Well, it was again another time when media was changing, Daniel, and so many things were just popping up with the internet and with video, et cetera. ESPN had just launched their ESPN3 brand, where again you could, if you they told colleges throughout the country, if you can produce a video broadcast to our standards, we'll put you on our ESPN3 platform. And those four letters, ESPN, are pretty big in the entire sports world, but especially in the college world. And so that was one of the first things I was charged with upon arriving in Birmingham and at Samford, was to build us a video department that was almost non-existent at the time. And we built it up to ESPN3 standards, to the point to where we were doing our full football schedule on ESPN3, men's and women's basketball. And since then, I got to tell you, I hired, right before I left, was able to find a young man named John McAfoose, who is now the director of video services at Samford in Birmingham. And he's just taken it to new heights. They're doing ESPN3 broadcasts for soccer and for baseball and softball and so many other sports. So I was really proud to kind of be in on the ground level of that, getting that going for Samford University, to where they're literally doing over 100 broadcasts a year on ESPN3 these days. So that was the fun part of it. And new to me again, you talk about how the medium changes, Daniel, and that video side of it was brand new to me. So that was certainly a challenge. And as it turned out, a whole lot of fun to get to learn.
Now, I know that for you, football, American football, not the football we talk about on the show that often, but American football for you has kind of been the sweet spot, soft spot for you in terms of sports. What about the game of American football really draws you and kind of touches your heart and soul and passion level in terms of the sport? Is it just being a product of SEC country and growing up in the South, where the game is just so popular and so huge? So do you think it was that part, or the culture, just the environment that you're in? What connects you in your love affair with the game of American football?
Well, what you mentioned, Daniel, is certainly a big part of it. I mean, growing up in Vicksburg, Mississippi, at a time when, for me, the college football to me meant the sight of Legion Field in Birmingham on my television, with Keith Jackson and Frank Broyles about to announce the Iron Bowl, Auburn versus Alabama. My dad was an Auburn man. And so I have vivid memories of watching Iron Bowls with Dad, when, again, that was the only college football game we got, one a week. That was it. And so I think that was it. I've got two older brothers as well. One of them who's almost 10 years older than me. And I mentioned the love affair and just, honoring Archie Manning. Well, my oldest brother was at Ole Miss when Archie was at Ole Miss. So I literally got to go with him to a couple of Ole Miss games as a 8, 9, 10-year-old, sit in the Ole Miss student section. And so that whole event, nature of it, the pageantry, the sounds, the color. I mean, again, I was just fascinated with that and just thought it would be fun. The same thing goes for baseball. I'm a huge baseball fan, and people have asked me over the years, which sport do I prefer to call on the radio. And the truth is, there's things about the three major sports that I've done that I very much enjoyed. I'm the least basketball fan of the three, but I love calling the game of basketball just because of the speed. You're so close to the action, sitting right at courtside, and the speed of the game. If you look down on your notes to see who number 5 is, he doesn't have the ball anymore when you look up again. So it's a challenge just to do what is a really fast-paced game in basketball. Baseball, I just absolutely love because of the strategy, because of the that lead up to the pitch, just the rhythm of setting all that up on the air. But football is the dearest love, and it's like you say, Daniel. It's just because I grew up on it in the South. I mean, it was the thing to do and the thing to be. And again, names like Keith Jackson and Kurt Gowdy and some of these other guys, Jack Buck, whose son Joe will call the Super Bowl here this weekend. I mean, these are the guys that I listen to. I would sit in my radio or in my bedroom and scan an AM radio dial trying to find Jack Buck calling the St. Louis Cardinals or maybe Jack Crystal calling a Mississippi State game back in the days, a guy named Stan Torgensen who used to call the Ole Miss games. These were my kind of childhood heroes, the guys I listened to, and it's what made being able to do this in sports radio so much fun. It really was kind of a lifelong passion. And I wish I had been smart enough to do it myself, but as I mentioned earlier, I just fell into the sports world. So somebody's been looking out for me for a long time now.
So I grew up, in a time where you had cable TV had kind of taken on, the TV animal to go from the kind of the three main channels to getting TBS, TNT, etc. And you started seeing the Atlanta Braves. One of the genius moves in media, in my opinion, was when Ted Turner had bought the Braves and then put them on TBS and just started beaming them out over the country, and built this national fan base for a team in Atlanta, Georgia. And what drew me to their broadcast, I loved baseball as a kid growing up. It was one of the sports that I enjoyed playing and enjoyed watching, going to games. My dad was a big fan of baseball, and so I think that was part of it too. But what made those Braves broadcasts for me so enjoyable was not just the strategy piece, but the storytelling and, the way those announcers, the Braves announcers on both radio and TV could just, the four of those main guys that would just kind of work off of each other and tell incredible stories, about the game, behind the game, and it may have been like, a locker room story pregame, just all this, that there was always this sense of storytelling and entertainment that came through, and I definitely enjoyed that as well. In terms of that aspect of calling games, you have baseball. It's got kind of one pace, typically a little bit slower pace, except for maybe inside of that one moment where there's a guys on base and a hit and you've got some action. But there's a lot of time for storytelling. The NFL or college football, high school football, playing American football, you've got not quite as many moments of storytelling, but you have kind of those almost like storytelling of a play, each play. And as you mentioned, basketball, just constant movement, constant change, and really a soccer broadcast is really a lot more like a basketball game than anything else because of the ball constantly moving. And so to see, media and personalities cover those different sports, it's always interesting to see rhythm and flow and how they find that for them, and do some of that storytelling. For you, how did you find that kind of rhythm and cadence for the different sports, and really kind of what kind of rhythm and cadence did you enjoy the most? I know that you love American football, but was there a sport that you called that you're like, man, I really love to call this one more than others, just because of that rhythm and cadence? What was your take on that?
Well, and again, there were parts of all three of those major sports that I enjoyed. As I mentioned, that there is a rhythm, certainly to basketball, where it's, Smith off the left wing, skip pass to Miller, just to follow the ball and do all that. There's a rhythm to that. Certainly to football, I love and this is where with football, especially on radio, and then this is a difference that you'll notice, guys, from radio and television. And I've dabbled in television over the years and enjoyed that, but radio's always been my bread and butter. On football and really all sports that are televised. If it's on radio, the play-by-play guy is the main guy because he's got to paint the picture for you. Your listeners can't see it. If you're on television, it's the analyst who's really the star of the show because what he's got to do is tell you what you didn't see, why that play worked. I've always said a play-by-play guy's job is what, a color analyst's job is why. That play worked because the fullback pulled out and chipped on the linebacker to open up the edge for the running back. That's it. And so there's a pre-snap rhythm in football that I've always loved. It's about two wideouts left, single set back to the right side of Smith in the shotgun formation. Is that pre-snap setup is always fun. Then you call the play, and that's the easy part. You just say what you see, and then your analyst hopefully has the right rhythm to jump in right after you. Again, identify whether it was a block here or a guy who shed a blocker and to make the tackle here, does his part, and then the rhythm falls right back to the play-by-play guy who picks back up with the new formation, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a great rhythm in that. But tops on the list is baseball, and it's because of that storytelling issue that you bring up, Daniel. I mean, you could be talking about the movie you saw last weekend or the dinner you had last night, and here's the 3-2 pitch. And, and so you don't want to get away from the game. It is one of my pet peeves with some broadcasters is that you get so far away, you're talking about everything other than the game. So keep me involved in the game, but it's certainly okay to tell stories along the line. And baseball's got that dramatic, here comes the pitch. And that rhythm has always been the funnest to me.
So as you have, worked in media, obviously decades, long experience, and seen, trends shift over the years, and coming up with kind of that radio and 3 channels on TV into cable TV, and then you get into digital, as you mentioned, leading Sanford into that transition of getting prepped and able to broadcast digital with ESPN3. Now we're living in a world where streaming TV is really becoming the standard, and as you're seeing households, shift away from traditional cable satellite packages into streaming TV, and everything's kind of moving towards, internet being the primary medium at which television is being delivered into homes and phones and iPads, and now we've seen in the last few months, Disney released the kind of bundle package with Disney Plus and ESPN Plus and Hulu, and you've got others who are, Netflix, Amazon, who's also doing some sports as well and kind of dabbling in sports. Netflix hasn't really gone there in terms of live content yet, but you have all these different platforms operating in the digital world, podcasting, shows like this one wouldn't have even been possible 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, but technology has changed rapidly to a place to where shows like this, your podcast, can be delivered and enjoyed on any kind of number of devices as well. You mentioned some of the layoffs of iHeart Media and the changing landscape there, and I read in their press release how they were making some of those changes to try to keep up with some of the trends that they're seeing and prepare, kind of better preparing the company for the future. As you look at where we are right now, taking into account, some of the trends that have already and changes that have been underway over the last 5 to 10 years, what are you seeing over the horizon going forward over the next 5 to 10 years in the landscape of media and in specifically in the world of sports broadcasting and sports media?
Daniel, you're right about the digital age. What ESPN Plus is doing now, I mean, they're creating original programming that you can only get on ESPN Plus. That's certainly the same for NBC Sports and so many others that all have their digital platforms now. I still think in the long run, the biggest sports that we follow, the NFLs, the Major League Baseballs, the NBA, and maybe even the NHL to a certain extent, they're still going to rely on the big networks and the big brands, the ESPNs, et cetera, to at least put their shows on cable. I mean, that's one of the things that the ESPN's fighting for right now is a Super Bowl, because every Super Bowl broadcast over the years has always been on one of the major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, or Fox. A cable outlet has never had a Super Bowl. And so, that maybe is the next step somewhere down the line as cable, again, is just, again, as a digital feed, whether you're getting it through cable or through satellite or whatever, it's in almost everybody's home these days. So when does a cable brand get a Super Bowl? And then beyond that, you think about the opportunities that are out there now with all the different Fox Sports regional networks, with the NBC Sports Network, CBS Sports Network, where you're seeing something like the Premier League, which, just going back 5 years ago, Daniel, how hard was it to find a Chelsea match, to watch? Man, maybe either 10 years ago, certainly it was harder than it is today, where you've got a chance to see so many different sports of so many different kinds at, again, your computer or your smartphone, and eventually some way, because of technology, your Apple TV or your Amazon TV or something along those lines. So it's only going to continue to go in that direction. I still think, again, the big brands are going to want the big networks because of just their push and the numbers that they can create. It's all about eyeballs or ears if you're in an audio medium. And so the big boys still have the advantage, but there's going to come a day when a cable network like ESPN or TNT or TBS, which has gotten into the college basketball arena the last few years, certainly TNT big in the NBA as well, one of those cable brands is going to chunk out enough money here soon to where you'll see a Super Bowl or a World Series or an NBA championship on one of those, what we call a cable brand.
So when you're looking at what's going on, and you mentioned, and I brought it up again about the iHeartMedia and some of the layoffs there, how do you think this shift into digital media, and then obviously taking into account, some of the big brands in sports, and then the big network names in sports, how do you see that transition and shift into digital media having an impact on those who want to have careers working in sports media?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that was so great about working at Samford all those years, Daniel, is I got to work with students. We have a broadcast journalism program at Samford, and I was able to bring those students in and give them opportunities to work on both sides of the camera or both sides of the microphone, work in the studio for a football broadcast, and then come be my sideline person somewhere down the line, work a camera for this soccer matchup, but a couple of years down the line, suddenly you're doing color for a soccer broadcast on ESPN3. So giving those new students and young people opportunities like that to learn, because that's the only way to do it, Daniel. And I'm sure in your experience with this podcast or whatever, the only way to learn how to do it is to do it. You can watch all the tutorials on YouTube you want to. You can read all the articles you want to as well. But to do what we do, you have to do it. And trust me, when you first start, you're probably not going to be very good. It's just the way it works. But you listen to yourself, you listen to others, you critique yourself, you make notes, you work hard at it, and it gets better. I am amazed at a recent article that Joe Buck wrote for the LA Times, where it was funny, again, the guy that's going to call the Super Bowl this weekend, whose dad called the Super Bowl the last time the Chiefs were in it 50 years ago. He'd never seen his dad call that Super Bowl. He was 8 months old at the time, so it's understandable. But one of the folks at NFL Films went and found the footage from 1970s Kansas City, Minnesota Super Bowl and brought it to Joe's house, and he watched his dad call a Super Bowl. And he was talking about the differences in the day, that, back in the day, it was Jack Buck, play-by-play, Pat Summerall, who became a great play-by-play guy at the time. He was doing color. And again, that they looked kind of disheveled. It looked like they were in a little bitty booth. They were probably all by themselves, while on this Sunday, there'll be 15 people in the booth with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman and statsmen and spotters and producers in their ear and all these different things. That you've got so much help. But the bottom line was, it's the same job. And while, again, Joe and Pat back 40, 50 years ago probably just turned on the microphone and talked, today you got to put so much more prep in it. Joe Buck said, my dad, I'm sure, slept great the night before the Super Bowl. Joe Buck said, I won't sleep well at all because I'll be worried about saying something stupid. I'll be worried about calling the wrong name. I'll be prepping right up until broadcast time. And so that's the thing. The opportunities are out there for anybody and everybody now with the podcast genre, with digital audio and digital video. Even you can do a TV show on YouTube if you want to, but you got to be good at it, which means you're going to have to work at it. That's the thing. There are so few opportunities with the big brands, and that's the thing that I hate about the iHeart News, Daniel. And this is the bottom line: is that what they're doing in these markets, such as Syracuse, New York, that now has 5 radio stations and 4 local announcers. It's not going to impact the listeners of Syracuse on an average every day. But what happens when you have a tornado, or you have, some kind of shooting, or God forbid, another 9/11? Where's the local coverage? I mean, I grew up at a time, again, when radio was so good at that. Television has certainly become that. But when the community you serve really needs you to do something other than play music or tell me the scores, what are you in position to do? And as I say, I've had some great broadcasts that were involved about snowstorms in Georgia or Mississippi or Alabama, where we're not used to that. But you get 6 inches of snow in Tupelo, Mississippi over the weekend, and it's a big story, and the community needs your help. We're just now, this week, I think we passed the 6-year anniversary of Snowmageddon in the Atlanta and Birmingham areas. In situations like that, these national brands that iHeart is using now to put Elvis Duran on your top 40 station in every market, he's not going to be able to serve that local market the way it needs to be served when issues like that come up. So I still think there's always going to be a need for live local broadcasting. But again, the industry's about making money and about making profits, and in these days, pleasing shareholders, and that's all about profits. And that's the bottom line behind iHeart's move. They can come up with all the pretty language they want to, Daniel, about the future. But the bottom line is they've gone through bankruptcy here in the last year or so. They've reduced their debt from, what was it, 16 billion, that with a B, down to 6. And that's the problem that the media industry is facing right now. That kind of debt, that kind of debt service, just requires you to thin out the ranks, to cut your cost, and to try to produce as many profits as you can. And I do think that somewhere down the line, the local listener or viewer suffers because of that.
As you look back and reflect over your career, what was one of your funniest moments? It might have been a blooper. It might have been just something you watched or had to broadcast. What was one of your funniest moments?
Oh, you should really ask Carol Ann that question, because she could probably give you a dozen different ones. The one that stands out to me, I'm standing at Legion Field in Birmingham, and I had the pleasure of working with the Alabama High School Athletic Association for, again, more than a decade, where I had their contract for their state championships. We did what is now the Super 7, used to be the Super 6, and we did 6 high school football championships games over the course of 3 days at Legion Field in Birmingham. And again, already mentioned to me, Legion Field in Birmingham meant college football to me as a kid, so it was such a thrill to do those games. When I'm standing there in the booth one day calling, I don't know, Hoover and Central Phoenix City or somebody, standing along with my entire crew, waving my arms. The broadcast is going great, so again, picture me standing up, waving my arms just up, front and back, just rocking along. And my left arm happens to catch the cable of my headset, and I literally jerked the headset off my head in mid play-by-play call and fumble around and put it back on my head. But by the time I got it back on my ears and was back on the air again, the entire booth was rolling in the floor. And yeah, I've embarrassed myself at least a few other times just besides that one. But yeah, just jerk your headset off in the middle of the broadcast.
Yeah, those are always fun moments when you're trying to call a play and you whoop, there goes your headset.
Well, and somewhere on YouTube there is a clip of a Samford basketball player literally landing in my lap and knocking me to the floor. That happened at Samford at home at the Pete Hanna Center in Birmingham doing a game. Ball comes my way. Samford players diving for it, and literally, I mean, there's no wrestling WWE wrestler who could have taken me out any better than Gerald Evans, I think was his name, who literally plant faced me into the hardwood. But I got back up, and it took me 5 or 10 seconds to gather myself. But the broadcast continued, as they say, the show must go on.
The show must go on. So I want to kind of pick up here what you're doing now. You've left Samford and you're continuing to broadcast. As you mentioned, you broadcast the bowl game, the college football bowl game that takes place every year in Mobile, Alabama. Continuing to do that 21 years broadcasting that game on radio. You're the host of the greatest podcast of all time. So tell us a little bit about your podcast and your show.
Well, and again, disclaimer, I am in no way saying it is the greatest podcast of all time. Sure, Daniel, I'd love for you to think that, but it's a podcast about the greatest of all time. And again, I go back, we talked about Ken Stabler earlier. Kenny's sort of the inspiration for this podcast because I was amazed at the people that would talk to him. I mean, we did interviews back in the day with the Pete Roses of the world, the Earl Campbells of the world, the Joe Namath, you name it, the biggest names in sports and even entertainment, would talk to Kenny. And so I always thought that this would be a great idea for Snake back in the day. We never got to do this exact radio show. So now that I've got the time, I'm going to do it. And, the first episode dropped this morning. I visited with Aaron Talent, who wrote a piece for Athlon Sports Online, which you can find at athlonsports.com. He ranked the Super Bowls from 1 to 53. And so he and I chat about it for a good bit. And then I kind of give you some of my thoughts too. I've got our lists are a little bit different. And so I didn't rank all 53, but I gave you my top 5. And for the most part, my Super Bowls are just the ones that I remember watching. And I can't remember whether we were together or not. I know I was in Daphne, Alabama for the Rams-Titans game that ended at the 1 foot line that we watched together years ago. So there's games like that just had dramatic finishes, close finishes, competitive throughout. And thankfully there have been more of those in recent years, Daniel. For years, the Super Bowl was a blowout. I mean, it was not a whole lot of fun to watch for so many years. And that's why we watch for the halftime performances and the commercials and so many other things. But that trend has really changed to where we've had better Super Bowls. But that's this week's broadcast. Next week, we're going to talk about Pro Football Hall of Fame snubs, the guys that you would think should be in the Hall of Fame but still aren't there yet. Later on down the road, we'll talk about the greatest Daytona 500 of all time. I'm a big NASCAR fan, so we'll do that. I've got the best college basketball player of all time on the list, and I'll just reach out to my contact list of industry experts and sports stars and sports figures, and we'll get their opinions week in and week out and just see if we can come up with what's the greatest fill in the blank of all time week to week.
Well, I trust, as a big Duke basketball fan, that I will have many of our former players on your list when you get to college basketball players. Just putting in my shameless plug for.
And that's the great part of this whole idea, though, Daniel, is because everybody's list is going to be a little different, right? I mean, everybody's going to have their own criteria, and so that's what I think is the fun thing about this. I want to get an expert's opinion, then I want to share my opinion, and I'm hoping that my listeners will interact with me through social media, et cetera, give me their favorites as well, and we can have that little discussion in a day and age when so many people are disagreeing and doing it loudly. Can't we do it in a fun manner? I mean, it's okay for us to disagree as long as we both agree that, hey, it's a fun question to try to ponder and go from there. So hopefully we won't get into too much shouting. As you mentioned, the swamp kind of news. We don't want that of what's going on in DC. But again, the idea is to have a little fun, create some fun memories, And I know doing the first episode was a blast, so I'm hoping that the future ones will be the same way. And appreciate you giving us a chance to talk about it, Daniel.
Absolutely. And, I just want to say before we let you go that, you're watching you and knowing you and watching your work was one of the inspirations for me to get into doing this show, obviously in kind of focused on the soccer world in the sporting landscape, but knowing your work and your experience and seeing your work, obviously knowing you and your career, it's been fun to watch, to see, because you don't do this for 40 years and have longevity without being quality. You don't keep a job and keep contracts for decades without quality. You're a quality person and also a quality broadcaster. So, thank you for doing you, being you, and doing it well, and for coming on the show. How can people find and follow your show, download your show, listen to your show, etc.?
Well, Daniel, first of all, the compliment you give me is the greatest I can get as a professional. And it's one of the things, again, I enjoyed so much about my time at Sanford. And really throughout my career, I've been blessed to do some great things. And I've tried to find opportunities for younger broadcasters to join me and help me. And hopefully I can give them an opportunity that they maybe wouldn't have had otherwise. So again, thanks so much for that. As far as the podcast, available everywhere you typically get your podcast. It's Apple Podcast and Google, also on Spotify and Stitcher and TuneIn. The easiest way maybe is just to go to my website. I'm MikeGraceLive.com, and there's a podcast tab there, and it'll be loaded there each and every week. And there's some other fun stuff on there. There is an audio section and even a video section where you'll see some clips from the past, some highlights with Ken the Snake Stabler from way back when, some of our bowl broadcasts, some of our Sanford broadcasts as well. So if you're really, really bored one day, find the audio section at MikeGraceLive.com and have some fun with that. Hey, look, before we're out of here, what's the deal with Arsenal, man? 10th place last time I checked?
Yeah, I'm a Barcelona fan first and foremost. I have to give this qualifier because people will sometimes claim I'm a front runner with my soccer teams, but I fell in love with Barcelona, Spanish soccer, and that's my team. I love the way that they play, going all the way back to Johan Cruyff when he was managing the club. But in the Premier League, I like Liverpool, and I've liked Liverpool like long before Jurgen Klopp got there. They're
crushing it. They're crushing it this year.
They're crushing it. They're 19 points clear of Manchester City in second place. It looks like they're going to win their first ever Premier League title. I have quite a few Arsenal friends who love Arsenal, and really what's going on with Arsenal is and I think they've got the right guy that they've just recently brought in. He needs time. Mikel Arteta, who was working under Pep Guardiola, who I think is the best manager in the world at Manchester City for the last few years. It's kind of the same way you dug into radio and just kind of grinded and hustled and worked. Arteta's been doing that with Pep Guardiola the last few years, transitioning from player to coaching, and I think Arsenal's going to benefit for that over the long run. But they're still in a state of transition where they just the last few years under Wenger were just kind of ho-hum, and you could kind of tell that the club had just kind of gotten in a groove of just going through the motions, and their choices since then to replace Wenger have been tough. They've just not been able to really get it turned around. I think Arteta is the guy to do that, but it's going to be a process, and Liverpool went through that process a few years ago. Brendan Rodgers came in and got them kind of going in the right direction. They were nowhere near where they're at now since Klopp came in. Klopp's on a different level. But now that Klopp's there and you've got that organization all on the same page, you're seeing it play out on the field. I think they're the best team in the world over the last 18 to 24 months. It's been fun to watch what they've been doing over the last couple of years. Got a chance to tour Anfield this summer with the family, and that was a really cool experience. And then we finished our trip to Europe this summer by catching a Barca Arsenal match at Barcelona, and so that was for me the ultimate thrill, and to get to take my family to Barcelona to see that was really cool. I'd been once before to a match, but I'd gone by myself and knew no one, and just I wanted to go and catch this particular match. It was kind of like you grew up watching the Iron Bowl in Legion Field. The biggest game in club soccer is Barcelona and Real Madrid every time they play. It's called a Clásico, and one of their legendary players at Barcelona, this was going to be his last Clásico, and I was determined not to miss it. So wow. I went, and it was the night of my life. Messi, Suarez for Barcelona, Ronaldo and Gareth Bale for Real Madrid all scored. It was a 2-2 draw. Unfortunately, they didn't win, but it was an incredible night. Barcelona was celebrating winning the league title with Real Madrid in town for a match. They had already clinched the title, so that was cool. And then just taking in the entire night was an amazing night. So in terms of Arsenal, I think they're going to get there. I think they're going to compete, but it's going to be a process of building, and it's not going to happen overnight. But I think they're going to get better as they go on. But
Daniel, if you don't already know, you know my boys, Daniel and Matthew,
right?
And for them, the Mecca is Stamford Bridge. Okay, they're both members of the Music City Blues, the Chelsea support club in Nashville. Matthew, in fact, has already been to Stamford Bridge once. He saw them last year. I think he's going back. He's got 2 games, I think, planned to see. He's going to see them at home against Everton and then at Aston Villa, I think it is. So the guys are big time into it. So your thoughts on Christian Pulisic? Can an American be a truly international soccer star?
I think an American will be a truly international soccer star. America is the greatest sports economy on earth, and it is in major need of that star. Time will tell on Christian. To me, he is the first one who has that potential, and part of that goes into media, just the landscape of where we are today, social media, digital media, etc. There's so much that an athlete and his team around him, and I'm not talking about Chelsea, I'm talking about his personal team of advisors and agents around him, can do to also help build the Christian Pulisic brand. And so it'll be interesting to see, if he makes that a priority. And then obviously he's got to couple that with, staying on the field healthy and having success on the field. But he has the potential to be, a really, really good player. Is he going to reach, Messi, Neymar, Ronaldo status? I don't think so. I'd love for him to prove me wrong. I know I've got a kid in my house who aspires to try to reach those kind of levels, and that's one of his goals for his playing career is to reach that kind of status. And so I mean, time will tell. I do think we will see that eventually one day, and when that happens, I think that you're going to see, both in the financial sense in the popularity sense, something akin to what we've seen since Sunday with the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and the 8 others on the helicopter, including his daughter. Kobe was a massive soccer fan, his time growing up in Italy. That world superstar status of a basketball player, the closest thing we've ever seen to Michael Jordan, his sudden and tragic passing has definitely played into the coverage of all of what's happened over the last few days. But he was a global superstar, and I think you would see that level and that market captivation in America, which then kind of just has this exponential effect on superstardom around the world. When we see that American superstar really, really rise to that level, and they may not be as good as, let's say, a Messi or Ronaldo in terms of greatest of all time, but David Beckham, who spent some time playing in Major League Soccer here in America, is still a global superstar icon. Never reached the levels of Messi, but still, I think somebody like that coming from America could have that kind of visibility and popularity around the world for sure.
Well, it is a fun sport for me to watch these days, Daniel, because again, it's new to me. I was the worst baseball dad as when my boys were kids, but I was a great soccer dad because I knew nothing about the sport, so I just got to sit in my lawn chair and enjoy. And I've done that the last few years, again, watching with my guys, becoming to appreciate the game. And I think folks who maybe if they've got a knock against soccer, it's their own fault. They need to sit down and watch it closely, watch it with someone who's knowledgeable on the sport, and watch for the intricacies of possession and the intricacies of play design. It's all there. It's just for those of us if we love football or baseball or basketball, and it seems complicated compared to that. Find somebody who knows the game and watch him with them. It's a beautiful game to watch.
I've always said about soccer, if you ever get an opportunity to go watch a really big match, especially a European soccer match or a South American soccer match, Brazil, Argentina, huge clubs down there, the passion of the fans, there's nothing like going and experiencing that live. It's kind of like hockey, people will say sometimes it's just hard for me to follow the puck. Go to an NHL match. It's a different experience in person than on TV. And once you go on the soccer side of things, to me, once you've gone and experienced that match, you start to kind of almost put yourself in the stadium when you watch the soccer matches on TV because you've been there. You feel the intensity and the passion and the all of the emotion that goes into the matches. And for all of you who are big American football fans who bash on the low scoring in soccer, you'll appreciate this. Just remember that when Alabama beats Auburn in an Iron Bowl 28-14, they really only won 4-2. So they just fooled you by saying their goal counted for 6 points and an extra point, not for one. So you didn't get any more high scoring than a soccer match. So all of you guys who think you did it better or have more action have actually bought the myth of American football scoring.
Well, Daniel, let me close out on this. That sense that you just described, that aura of being in the building, the excitement, the color, the pageantry, the noise. Imagine doing that with a headset on and getting paid for it. I'm about as blessed as a guy can get, man. And so it's been a fun run. And hey, look, I'm still doing it. I'm doing freelance play-by-play now. I've worked in the past year for UAB, called some basketball for them. Actually have done football for UAB as well in years past, for Troy as well. Most recently, I've done baseball for both Arkansas and for Georgia Tech here in the Atlanta area. Looking forward to doing some Georgia Southern basketball and baseball later on in this spring. So it's still the funnest job in the world, man. And it's been a blast to talk about it with you. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It was great to catch up with you. Say hey to your lovely wife and the kids. Hope everyone's doing well.
Likewise.
And your boys being Chelsea fans, I'll allow that as long as they stay below Liverpool in the Premier League. We'll be okay. Thanks for coming on the show. I look forward to listening and catching your new show. Again, everyone watching and listening, you can find that link by just simply going to MikeGraceLive.com to do that. Mike, thanks for joining the show. I appreciate it. It was great catching up with you. Let's make it not take too long before we do this again.
Hey, man, I'm here for you anytime, Daniel. So proud of what you're doing, man. And if I can ever be of assistance, holler at me, okay?
Will do. Thank you so much.
You bet.
That is Mike Grace, and 40-year career in media, and really, really was happy to have him on to have a chat about his career, what he's seeing of the future, and all of his insights on past, present, and future in the world of sports. So big thanks to him for coming on the show. As always, you can watch the show on Facebook.com/WRKMN. Catch it on Twitter, on YouTube, even at DanielWorkman.com. You can catch me personally on Twitter or Instagram at Daniel Workman. Thanks for watching the show. As always, hope you have a great weekend. We'll see everyone again on Monday.